Hi everybody, I'm Michael. This is a review for Classic Start's Moby Dick. It's an abridged version of the famous Moby Dick book by Herman Melville, which was written in the 1800s, and it's something like 700, 800 pages long. I really can't imagine how it's that long, as it's like 5 or 6, maybe even 10 times as long as this book, which is just kind of mind-blowing to me, because this book felt like it had a lot of stuff happening. Unless there's like a 300-page subplot where our main character falls in love, I just don't see how this could be expanded so much. I guess they probably just cut out a ton of stuff. Well, I thought it was an okay book, but at the same time, I'm really glad I read an abridged version, because this actually kind of felt a little bit too long to me. There's a little too many chapters which just sort of repeated the same idea that Captain Ahab is obsessed with Moby Dick. And I kind of know the basic plot point of Moby Dick because I've seen movies and TV, and there's a bunch of Moby Dick versions of Moby Dick everywhere, jokes, references to them, even Star Trek 2, the second Star Trek movie. That's a big Moby Dick storyline. So, what's the story? Our main character, our narrator, is a guy named Ishmael, who's a very, anxious, rambunctious fellow. He wants to have adventure, so he wants to become a sailor. And, I really wish that followed through for the entire book, because, Ishmael does have some personality here at the start, but then he just sort of fades into the background and becomes like this passive observer who's just describing everything that happens on the ship. He doesn't become a major player. He's not interacting with any of the characters, not really. It's mostly just him passively explaining everything that happens to the more important characters. So I think probably in the original Moby Dick, he has more of a personality and does more. At least I hope. I hope that's the case. So, he gets a roommate who's also a sailor, who is a very large man with a bunch of tattoos. I forget exactly which island he comes from. It was New Zealand, right? He comes from New Zealand. He's like a prince in New Zealand. And people are racist against him. And he kind of just is a very stoic fellow. Queequeg is his name, I believe. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't know if that's a real name or if it's one that's made up for the book. Probably one that's made up for the book. So he was interesting. He's an interesting, strong, silent type character. Although I feel like because this is a modern version, they definitely toned down the racism. So, for example, the line of dialogue is something like, "Someone said something very rude to Queequeg," and I'm sure in the original it actually had the line of dialogue with these random strangers are just being mean to him, and when their boat's in trouble, he saves them, and all of a sudden they're very grateful and very happy to him, and it's just a bunch of two-faced jerks, man. So it was interesting. Also, Queequeg introduces himself by purposely trying to scare Ishmael, which is not very nice, but the two of them become bosom buddies. They become really best friends, and Queequeg kind of fades into the background too once our two characters arrive in Nantucket and they get on a sailing boat, which is the Pequod. I think I've seen that in other books. Definitely in the Lemony Snicket series. He's got references to Moby Dick. Yeah, it's definitely got characters and boats named after Moby Dick characters and boats. Anyway, so he gets a job on a sailing boat, and he hears these rumors about the captain, Old Thunder he's called, and somebody is like, "Oh, you're working for Captain Ahab. Oh, you'd better look out." It's like, what's that supposed to mean? Oh, you'll find out. So he doesn't actually see Ahab until 3 weeks into the voyage, and it's very interesting because Ahab just kind of comes up onto the deck, stares stoically at the ocean, I guess sort of like this, sort of like on the cover. And then he just goes back into his cabin without saying a word. And Also, Captain Ahab is going back to the racism. I feel like, yeah, this version tries to address the racism and say Captain Ahab is pretty progressive in that he lets other people eat in the same place he does. Even though he's the captain, he doesn't like sit in a separate section. Now, granted, he and the officers get to eat before everyone else. They still do that, but it's not the case that it's segregated seating, and so that's progressive-minded of Captain Ahab. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Sometimes I feel like the book kind of over-explains it, like a harpoon is a weapon that sailors use to fight whales. Sometimes, that was like once or twice, but for the most part, when it's explaining like things which you wouldn't know. I've never been whaling. I didn't know how they hunted whales, and I actually thought that was interesting. We did get several chapters, like 2 or 3 chapters about that, where, they hunt a whale for the first time. We get to see the process, and then there's another chapter where it's the process of hauling up a whale and cutting it into pieces and getting the oil into it. And unfortunately, there's a problem, so they have to let the whale go, and it's sort of a waste. They put all the effort into catching the whale, and they had to let it go because it was too heavy. It's going to knock over the entire boat. And yeah, that was interesting too. And a chapter about all the different types of rope and knots, which was not interesting at all, but I'm told that was in the original. I remember seeing a comic strip that made fun of the original. It's like, I know this is a brilliant book. I know these are beautiful metaphors for humanity, and it's just talking about rope for 30 pages. Ah! Maybe that's why the original is like 700 pages long. Like if that chapter is 30 pages. If we expand all these chapters, make sure they're 50 times as long. Yeah. Anyway, Captain Ahab, as you probably know, has a peg leg because a whale named Moby Dick bit his leg off. So it's the great white whale. So this is the largest whale in the ocean. It's got a grizzled brow. It likes eating humans, and people have been trying to kill it because it's like the most famous whale in the ocean. So it's got like 5 or so harpoons already sticking out of it. It's just wandering free through the ocean. It does like to tease humans, apparently. So Captain Ahab is just singularly obsessed with capturing Moby Dick. And that's where I thought it got a little boring, because there was like chapter after chapter after chapter where the moral of the chapter is Ahab really is obsessed with this Moby Dick, and just needs a little bit more variety. It's kind of tough when they're on a boat in the middle of the ocean. There's really nothing else they can do. And so we did get a few chapters where they come across another boat. So they come across a German boat that needs oil, and then some whales show up, and they sort of have a competition to see if they can beat the Germans to get to the whales first. And they've got a boat that's like half damaged. It was damaged by Moby Dick. And, this one person on board is just screaming at them to stop, go away. Moby Dick will destroy you. And Captain Ahab does not care in the slightest. Let's see, there's another boat that is missing crew, the Rachel. This is almost at the end where Moby Dick attacked, and some of the crewmen were just floating off, and they're trying to find them, and Captain Ahab doesn't care. He doesn't care about saving people. He only cares about Moby Dick. He wants to get revenge on that whale. And another chapter where they meet a captain whose arm was bit off by Moby Dick. And Captain Ahab is really interested, and he kind of goes back and forth through the conversation, because, if the guy's talking about Moby Dick, he's interested. Wait, you're talking about something Moby Dick did 2 years ago. Well, then I'm not interested. I'm trying to capture him now. That's totally irrelevant to my current quest. That's how Ahab responds. And they do have an interesting contrast where this other captain, he's like, I've already lost one limb to Moby Dick. That's enough. I don't need to fight him anymore. And then the scientist is like, whales don't eat limbs on purpose. That it's it's totally an accident. He's not evil. And Captain Ahab just does not care at all. But it is a contrast between the the captain who's like, he had he lost an arm to Moby Dick, but he's fine. He's never gonna hunt Moby Dick again. He's fine. Captain Ahab, he lost a leg to Moby Dick. He's obsessed. He wants to destroy it. And I did like one line that Captain First Mate Starbuck had, where he's like, Ahab, you're the only one who cares about defeating Moby Dick. Like, Moby Dick is not out to capture you. He's not out to get you. It's like, you're the one who's chasing him. He doesn't care. He's just a giant fish. Because they thought whales were fish back then, when the book was written. I don't know if they called the whale a fish in this version or not. I forget. So the ending was actually pretty dramatic, pretty lengthy too. It's like a 3-day fight against Moby Dick, where like each day they kind of go out in boats. Captain Ahab gets some good shots off, but Moby Dick manages to destroy the one boat. But everybody's safe, so no lives lost. And then the second day, they've kind of learned their lesson from their first day, so they're swimming around the different patterns. They're not falling for the trick of Moby Dick going up from the bottom of the ocean. And again, it's sort of like a draw. And the third day, you can tell that Moby Dick is really losing speed and being tired from 3 straight days of chasing. And Moby Dick is very badly injured because, you know, Ahab just keeps getting harpoon after harpoon after harpoon, and Moby Dick actually destroys the main boat, just smashing it up from the bottom over and over again. But Ahab doesn't really care about the boat or the other people. That's just reminded me of another thing that happened when the boats are leaking. The boat starts leaking whale oil, and Ahab's like, "We just got our first like confirmed Moby Dick sighting in a long time. I don't care." And Starbuck's like, "No, we have to go to Japan to get repairs." And he's like, "I don't care. Fix it." And so they have to go under into the hold to find the leaking barrel of oil. And poor Queequeg gets sick, and they think he's going to die. They actually make a coffin for him. That's how sure they are that he's going to die. But he actually pulls through, so that's good. But really dramatic ending where Captain Ahab kind of gets Moby Dick and kind of doesn't at the same time. I'm not sure how this book was trying to imply it. I think it's supposed to be the case that they killed each other. Like, Ahab lands the killing blow, and then Moby Dick goes swimming down into the bottom of the ocean while he's dying. But harpoons, obviously, they have rope attached to them, right? So that way, if you miss, you can pull it back and throw it again. So the harpoon rope tangles around Ahab's neck and kills him. So he's dragged down to the bottom of the ocean with Moby Dick. So they both die together. And actually everybody dies except for our narrator, Ishmael, who just by pure chance gets inside the coffin meant for Queequeg and sails in the coffin, basically rides in the coffin for a couple days until the people of the Rachel manage to pick him up and save him. It is a very powerful scene. I did like the big ending. I guess it kind of made up for like the 4 or 5 chapters that preceded it, which were just the exact same thing of Captain Ahab being obsessed. I did see one review saying that this is a very watered down version. Like, the original has all sorts of literary allusions and religious allusions. Like, this one vaguely mentions the story of Jonah, and that's as close to like any biblical references we get. I'm sure the original has references to the Odyssey. It's got to have references to the Odyssey. It is a sea-going adventure written in the 1800s. Of course it does. But this book does not go for that. No literary allusions here. Okay, so that's it for Moby Dick. As I said, I'm glad I read it. It was interesting to finally read the story. It was a little boring with the repetitive parts of Captain Ahab, and I do think like the characters could have been more lively and more interesting. But I assume that, you know, Ishmael and Queequeg play a much bigger role in the original book as opposed to this very much slimmed down version where, you know, it's about 100 to 120 pages, and I thought it was fairly good, but you know, I'm sure there's just a ton of stuff that I missed because, like I said, the original book is over 700 pages long. So, thanks for watching my review. Bye.